Hey guys, how's it going? Phil here. So, on the channel, we just posted a bunch of stuff about the new Undertaker Taunt Druid, and essentially I just wanted to do a follow-up piece to those, discussing the differences between this current iteration with the Undertaker that just came out, versus the, more standard, older style of Dragonhatcher and large Taunt Dragon, Taunt Druid packages. So, this is essentially the same list that we left off with in the last video. What I decided to do was switch out one War Bear to instead fit in a second Astral Tiger to, increase the consistency that the Undertaker shuffles itself in multiple times. Obviously it's still the early days of the meta, and this deck really only has existed for like 2 days, so there's not a super refined list out. There's still, little intricacies like how many Astral Tigers you run, how many late game beasts you want to run, and, large taunt minions. Is Tyrantus worth running in this list? Stuff like that, questions that haven't really quite been answered, along with, is running Juicy Psych Melon in a standard deck worthwhile? Um, but yeah, so this list we've covered pretty extensively. It seems really powerful. Having the infinite Undertakers just pose a really, strong threat every single turn is really powerful, especially because after your first or second Undertaker, essentially there's nothing they can do to beat you, and you're basically guaranteed to get your first Undertaker to go off, now that Spellstone can go to 6 damage to kill your Undertaker. So that kind of acts as like Hadronach's Naturalize goes together, and then Undertaker and Spellstone go together. The synergy within, those cards is really, really good, because it means that you can still run these kind of anti-aggro tools, and they still serve a purpose in your deck for control matchups, which is something that the Spellstone kind of lacked in previous versions. It could still be used in previous versions to pop the cube after you Witching Houred, but that, you know, was a lot more fringe than just the Undertaker and Dispelstone can be. So this list we've covered extensively. It seems incredibly powerful, but there was a discussion going on the competitive Hearthstone Reddit today about the validity of Master Oakheart and Dragonhatcher still in Taunt Druid, now that the Undertaker has kind of come up as like the defining force of this deck. And I don't have a full list, mostly because I just didn't want to steal a incomplete list off of Reddit, but I wanted to go over the basic pros and cons of each list, just so that we can, discuss the differences and figure out which one might be better. Obviously, both of them need time to be tested, but I just want to put this idea out there as soon as I could once I read about it. So, essentially, this will run the same late game package, so you still run stuff like Hadronach's, Undertaker, Astral Tiger, so you still get all the same recursive buffs on your Undertaker, but in the late game, instead run Master Oakheart and take full effect of his battle cry to make a larger swing versus aggro. The Master Oakheart version seems inherently worse versus control because you're running bad cards such as, Dragonhatcher. Along for your 2 attack off of Master Oakheart, there's been discussions about Rabble Bouncer because it's a taunt minion, so it will come back with your Hadronachs. And it has 2 attacks, so it comes with Oakheart, but it's also not the worst thing just to have, because against aggro where it's more useful, its cost gets reduced. And then there's also been discussion about Moshog Enforcer, simply because a 214 is a ton of stats, and Taunt Druid isn't really looking to win the game through burst damage. You're just trying to outlast your opponent and get damage in once they can't deal with your entire taunt board. So something like Moshog Enforcer, there's not too many things that punish it, especially in an aggro deck, so it seems pretty powerful. And then you still get to run the Dragon package, so you get a little bit of AoE and Primordial Drake. You can consider Sleeping Dragon just because it's super large, but Taunt Druid is already a very grindy deck, and with the inclusion in the newer Undertaker version of Oondasta and the Armani War Bear and stuff like that, you're able to make pretty large swing turns in the late game. So Oondasta comes down on turn 9, Master Oakheart can come down on turn 9, and really the two differences between the lists is trying to figure out which one helps you more versus aggro, while still being, useful enough to warrant including versus control. And honestly, the Master Oakheart Battlecry doesn't seem strong enough compared to some of the Oondasta shenanigans you can do in the other, in the previous list. Master Oakheart, to function as a card, requires that you have a 1, a 2, and a 3 attack minion. And essentially, the only good 1 attack minion you can run is like Tar Creeper or Trug Gloom Eater, something like that. And that's not really a card that you want to be running in general, because if you're going to be running Tar Creeper instead of the Trog, you have to cut Oaken Summons and Ironwood Golem, so that's a big part of your early game. It's also a big way to buff up your Spellstone early on in the game, which against aggro, which, the Master Oakheart version is supposedly going to be better against aggro because you get the bigger swing turn. Losing out on those Spellstones being upgraded early can really hamper your early game. It also means that your Hadronox Death Rattles can bring back stuff like Rabble Bouncers, which are 2/7s, not very threatening. Mashog Enforcers, 2/14s, not very threatening. And you're already going to be running double Spreading Plague because you no longer have to run Witching Hour. And so Spreading Plague is just going to be a must in this style of deck, almost positively. Things are open to change because the meta hasn't settled. This deck list isn't refined at all, and there's going to be these two separate, attempts at the list: the Oakheart version and the Undertaker Oondasta Bigger Beasts version. Um, but this means that with your Oakheart polluting the pool more with bad taunts, you're going to have Spreading Plague polluting your pool. Your Hadronox is really going to bring back like a lackluster board. And although you're trying to just outlast, I'm not sure if versus control running these really low impact threats is going to be enough. Because obviously you're still going to run Undertaker and you're still going to run the Astral Tiger package. So you're going to have an infinite amount of these boards. But if you're going to be running the Oakheart version, you have to run Trog. That's not a super useful card. If you're not running Trog to make full effect of the 1 cost or the 1 attack function of Oakheart, you have to run Tar Creeper. If you're running Tar Creeper, you can't run Oaken Summons, and Oaken Summons is currently the best way to tutor out your Astral Tigers to ensure that your Undertaker actually, performs its duty. So I think that this style of list is something to be considered. But going into, this first week of Rastakhan's kind of finishing up, if you're going to be crafting cards to make one of these two lists, I believe that Oakheart in the end is going to be less valuable, simply because it requires your deck to go in so many different directions, and Taunt Druid with the new Undertaker package, so you never hit fatigue, you get these giant boards. It's already a control killer, so I guess you can try to like hedge your bets and be better versus aggro, but it just seems like running these low value cards, and you're trying to fit so much late game into this deck already. So if you're running stuff like Rabble Bouncer to make effect of the 2 attack, Rabble Bouncer does decrease in cost, but it's still quite expensive. If you're running Moshug Enforcer, this is even worse because it can't reduce its cost. So this is a big threat. It costs a lot of mana, but it doesn't really do a lot. So it's essentially only there to get pulled from Oakheart. If you decide to not run anything that's 2 attack to ensure that you get the Dragonhatcher, that means that your Oakheart is inherently less consistent. So that means if you draw hands with like double Dragonhatcher throughout the game, you just exhaust that resource. Not only are your Dragonhatchers kind of stranded, your Oakheart is stranded because its Battlecry doesn't do as much, and then your Sleepy Dragons are also going to be much less effective because dropping a 9 mana 4/12 in a match that's going kind of back and forth, and you really need to make the most of each turn, typically isn't going to be enough. So I think my first impression is that this style of list that we ran during the Tavern Brawl is going to be better, simply because it has a lot more of the Druid early game tools. So you're set on going with the Oaken Summons package. That's really strong in the early game. That buffs up your Spellstones for aggro decks. You still have room for like swipe. You get to run Ziliax. With that other list, you might not want to run Ziliax because it has 3 attacks, so it can get recruited from Master Oakheart instead of your Hadronox. And using Master Oakheart as a way to pull out your Hadronox just seems overall less powerful and less consistent than, waiting to draw it with, or drawing it directly with Psych Melon, and then Oondastaing it out, or just playing it out by itself and then naturalizing it really quick. Essentially, all three of the ways to get Hadronox cost 9 mana, and then you have to naturalize it so that you can play around transform effects and silence and stuff like that. So, out of playing it by itself, playing Oondasta and pulling it, or playing Oakheart and pulling it and then going off, I think that you just are better off either playing it by itself or playing Oondasta, especially because you'd be able to run Psych Melon along with that, because you have so much late game. But it's not enough. It's not so much late game where your draws aren't consistent. So your 7's always going to be this, your 8 is always going to be 1 of 2, and your 9's always going to be 1 of 2. If you try to fit in the Oakheart package, that can start to change this up a bit. So that's something to consider as well. But yeah, essentially I just wanted to go over kind of the differences. If you didn't like the style of list we were running during the Tavern Brawl, then it might be worth considering diving into a Oakheart-centric list. It just seems that, like, old Taunt Druid that ran Oakheart, Witching Hour cubes, it had a lot more dead draws and dead hands than I've ever had in my testing with the Heroic Tavern Brawl list. So going back to that package seems kind of weak. Also, the dragons, like, they're not very good by themselves is the problem. So essentially, if you're running the Master Oakheart version, you have to run a bunch of suboptimal cards that get a lot better when they synergize with each other. But the question is whether that synergy is worth more than just running a more consistent list like the one that we've been running. So both warrant testing, but I think with this first week of Rastakhan's Rumble, wrapping up, this is probably going to be the style of list that sticks around longer, just because it seems much more consistent, and just overall its swing turns seem more powerful than those of the Master Oakheart list. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure to check out the other videos on Taunt Druid if you want to see, gameplay and a little bit more insight into this specific list. And remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz, if you feel like, doing that. So yeah, have a good one, guys.